his leadership, his stewardship of these very special ways of communicating to the American people. I just left a meeting on the temporary protective status, so I will try to summarize my remarks, because I think it's very important to join in the Congressional Black Caucus Special Order, and I want to thank the chairman, Mr. Richmond, and my colleague, Mr. Payne, and my colleague, Mr. Evans, who will join us on that effort, because this is a way to communicate with our colleagues of the urgency of some of these issues. So let me, first of all, take a moment that really gives me great consternation, great concern, and that is that we all, I've said in my remarks while the President was out of the country, that I will always wish him safe travels and safe return. But you have to think how we have turned the corner on the dignity of the presidency when you have to monitor the tweets or the words that are being said by that office when they are out of the country. So one point I just have to make, because I am a product of the Voting Rights Act of 1965. Barbara Jordan was able to be the first African American from Texas since Reconstruction elected to the United States Congress, along with Andy Young from Georgia after the Voting Rights Act. Now, Mr. Speaker, there was nothing untoward. It was just simply allowing one person, one vote. And heretofore in the Deep South and in Southwest, African Americans were denied the right to vote by suppression and poll tax and a number of tactics. But the Voting Rights Act eliminated or prevented, it had to have preclearance of any discriminatory factor that could be raised that would keep minorities from voting, that one vote, one person. So it pains me to read the headlines. Trump says he believes Putin's election meddling denials. I believe that it is important for people of goodwill, for members of the United States Congress, to denounce these comments and to ask for the dignity of this office to really put Americans first and put this nation first, because that is not what is being done. All of the intelligence agencies, 17 plus, have indicated that not only did they influence, they intruded, they skewed the election. They didn't just meddle. You cannot ask a former KGB officer to tell you that he didn't meddle in our elections. Elections matter. And so this is no comment on who won or lost. This is a comment on reality. The elections were skewed to one person, and it was confirmed by the intelligence agencies, and it's time for the highest office to speak on behalf of the American people. That brings me right to the Trump tax cuts, the Republican tax cuts. And I spoke earlier during the 1 minute to try and correlate between tax cuts and the needs of the American people. By having these major tax cuts that will offer more benefits to corporations, which, by the way, are having their biggest season of profits that we've ever had. They are succeeding beyond imagination. They have not only stock prices going up, but the profits that they're able to stock away are going up. Take that in the backdrop of this tax bill having to cut and violate the Medicare Trust Fund and Medicaid in order to find the dollars to be able to give the top 1% the greatest tax cut, and to give corporations a 20% tax cut in the United States and a 12% tax cut overseas, which, in addition to giving them that money on the corporate rates, which is a reasonable thing to discuss, but by the inequity of the lower amount being overseas, you can imagine that jobs are still going to leave and go overseas. This is a tax cut that is made for the basket, if you will, of goodies for the top 1%. This is not worrying about working Americans. So let me put into the record what you will lose. You will lose the mortgage interest. You will lose the fairness of the child tax credit. You will, in fact, lose the student loan interest, tuition, and other education expenses, personal casualty losses, tax preparation costs, medical expenses, alimony payments, moving expenses, which will impact Hurricane Harvey in a manner that my constituents in Cashmere Gardens, Northeast Houston, 3rd Ward, Acres Home, the Heights, Jacinto City, places where individuals have been impacted, this moving expense elimination of that as a deduction will impact individuals who are trying to restore their lives. And employee business expenses. This bill will hurt the average working American. It is a frightening bill. I would almost like to say it is a bill made near purgatory on the way to you know where. This is a disgusting attack on hardworking Americans. I wanted to also put in the record my concern about extending the temporary protected status for Haitians as well as El Salvadorians and a number of other countries that are facing the 6-month deadline that seems to be what is going to be coming out of or has come out of the administration. All of these countries have devastation, and all of these countries are deserving, if you will, of an extension for the people who are here because they are, in fact, suffering still. Haiti is suffering still from the earthquake. El Salvador is suffering. And I want to mention one of my constituents Jose and his wife, who was deported during the horror and the hysteria of the announcements from the administration of I'm going to be hard on deportation, and a hard-working family man, a manager of a paint store, was deported out of this country back to El Salvador, where there is no work, there's no opportunity, and they're still suffering from the devastation of years past. This is what we are in the mix of. Let me finally express, as I indicated, my concerns about extending the temporary protected status, and certainly for Haitians and others, and we're working on that as we speak. And then to make mention of the fact, let me come back to Hurricane Harvey. There are about 50,000 people in the hotels, so we are still in need. I'm going to close on this. We just experienced Veterans Day, and what a pleasure to be able to speak about or speak with the many veterans who celebrated the Buffalo Soldiers, celebrated at the downtown celebration. The American Legion on the Aldine Mail Route had a parade. Stafford had a parade. Many places had a parade. I want to celebrate veterans by saying thank you. And when I spoke to young people, 8th graders, I told them about the value of joining the United States military, putting on the uniform. Policy does not relate to the value of the men and women who put on the uniform. And I believe that it is certainly of concern that we should understand what the needs of the military are. And if this proposal goes forward of giving waivers for individuals with depression, bipolar disorder, getting waivers, let me be very clear. I advocate for the full utilization of people and those people who have mental health issues. It is very important, as they are recruited into the United States military, that all of the resources needed to have them perform at the fullest of their capacity, we must ensure as members of Congress that that happens. That must be our responsibility, because as we look at our veterans and we see the sacrifice, we see what war means, we have to make sure that we embrace them solidly and respect them and honor them. So, Mr. Veazey, thank you for allowing me to share a few thoughts, and I'll simply say you are absolutely right. this tax legislation will be devastating, costly, and hard for the country to dig out of the deepening debt that is going to be created. With that, I yield back to the gentleman.
Thank you. I appreciate my colleague, my fellow Texan, for her eloquence in laying out the issues with the Republican tax plan.